So my name's Mr. Fremuth. I'm a seventh grade writing teacher for Team 7C. This is my fourth year at DMS, and I'm happy to be joining Mr. Shirley here to talk about purchases of happiness and unhappiness.
That's right. So let's get started with, I think, a really fun one. Do you mind talking about a purchase in your life that after it happened, your happiness dropped?
Yeah, definitely. So there are two that come to mind. One that's both from my childhood. One kind of smaller example, and then one slightly larger example. In terms of the smaller example, when I was growing up, there were these things called Tamagotchis. I don't know if you remember those, but they were like these like little like egg type things. And I remember that like you had to like feed them throughout the course of the day, and you were really just pressing buttons, and it was feeding them. And then like you had to make sure that they used the bathroom, and you had to make sure that they like ate and all of this. It was basically like preparing for a very, very subdued version of parenthood. But I specifically remember like really, really wanting them when I was growing up, and then it felt like a chore, which I guess it kind of was. But I distinctly remember, purchasing it, really wanting it beforehand. But then once I had it, it wasn't something that was bringing me joy. It felt more almost like a burden.
Do you remember?
As I
Do you remember why you were compelled to buy it at that age?
I assume it was because of either advertisements or my friends having them. I
Okay.
don't really like. It's the weird thing about childhood when you're an adult, right? Like you have sort of these like glimpses of memories. So like I really remember the emotion of wanting it. I don't necessarily remember the experiences around wanting it, but I think that kind of speaks to what you're talking about here too. That like those memories aren't all that powerful after the fact because the emotion that was driving them was actually rooted more in unhappiness than happiness.
Mhm. Yeah. The thing that caught my ear was you said your friends had them, so then you had to get it. So what was the other thing? So Tamagotchis, you had them,
Yeah,
and
so Tamagotchis was the kind of small one, and unfortunately, I don't have the spelling for that. So if any of you are trying to Google it, good luck with the spelling. I think it's phonetic, but we'll see. The larger one was actually something that was bought for me from my parents. So when I was in high school, they bought me an electric guitar. Now, as I remember, it was a used electric guitar, so they didn't buy it new. And I'm very, very glad that they didn't buy it new because I ended up very, very rarely using it. And this was more of like kind of a long-term thing that brought me unhappiness. And it kind of taught me that when you're purchasing something with money, purchasing something for real, you really need to think through it ahead of time. This was something where I kind of made the decision rashly and told my parents, "Hey, I want an electric. Hey, I want an electric guitar." And I hadn't really thought through all the things that would be involved in that, whether it be music classes, whether it be teaching myself how to play. And what then ended up happening was that, I would kind of strum on it from time to time, but most of the time, the guitar would just sit in the corner of my room on the stand, and then it became burdensome. It became this thing that I was looking at times, and it constantly reminded me that I wasn't doing what I had said that I was going to do with it. So it almost became this. I think the emotion that I was feeling most was kind of regret. Their money and my time correctly or most appropriately with that kind of, with what was a large purchase.
moving on, I'm curious, what experiences have you had that have increased your happiness? Um, can you think of things that you've bought with your time, that you've spent a lot of time on that you enjoy?
Yeah. So just as with the other example, I have two that I kind of think of right off the bat. And I'll start with what I'll call like the slightly quote unquote bigger one, which wasn't something that I bought financially with any money at the time, but it's also part of the reason for the background. Over my adulthood, I've become really, really interested in nature, and I've become interested in spending time in nature. So my family and I will go to Maine every summer. And, So we'll spend money to get up there. We'll, rent a house for a couple of weeks. But then when we're actually physically in the state of Maine, in the place that we stay, we don't spend a lot of money there. We'll buy food at the grocery store and we'll cook at the house. When we go out to places, we'll be going out to, national parks. We'll be going to different hiking grounds, or we'll be going kayaking, different things like that. So a lot of these things where we don't need to necessarily spend much, if any, money on the activity that we're doing, but we're able to experience a moment. And I think what's memorable for those experiences with me are both being in nature, which is something that I just find really powerful and very comforting and very relaxing, but then also being with people,
Hmm.
being with the people that I love, being with the people that I enjoy spending time with. So those then end up being really, really memorable experiences with me. And then I think because sort of like the finances of everything are so ingrained in us, you then kind of have the extra benefit after the fact of going back to the house and being like, oh, that was a really fun time and I didn't spend any money.
No guilt.
So
Yeah.
I don't feel the guilt of spending the money, and I feel the joy of spending time with people.
And you said you had a second example of an experience?
Yeah. Yeah, so the second example, and I'm glad that you reminded me to bring that up, because the second example for me is something that I actually try to do every single day, and it's on a much smaller scale, I think. But, I mentioned that I'm a writing teacher, so I like to create things, but I don't like to only create writing. I also like to create meals. I love to cook. So one thing that I do mostly every day if I can, is I try to set aside time to cook a meal, to cook a dinner. And I'm very, very regulated and structured about it. Once it hits 5 o'clock, I'm starting on dinner for that night. And it requires some planning ahead of time. It requires purchasing the ingredients ahead of time. But in that moment, I'm just able to be creative. I'm just able to exist in that moment. And what I've found over that time is that I feel accomplished because I've created something. I feel nourished for obvious reasons, but I
Hmm.
also feel relaxed. It's become sort of a therapeutic and relaxing experience for me to kind of dedicate my time and energy to this creative endeavor. But then also, just kind of exist and be present in that moment. I think I'm a big believer in mindfulness and trying to be as present in the moment as possible at all times. And I think one of the times that I'm most present in the moment is when I'm cooking.
So that thank you for your contribution to this. That's a lot of ground to cover. Are you able to sort of like wrap this up and bring it home? In some a way to summarize your thoughts about this, or even give advice.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So I think I'll say a couple of things just to kind of wrap up the things we've talked about. We're talking about spending, right? So I think one conclusion would be that, especially now, spend time with people as much as you can, whether that
Mm-hmm.
be, digitally or in person. Spend time with people as opposed to spending your money. And the other suggestion that I would give, and this goes back to more to my cooking example, is try to find something that you can do every day that makes you happy. The more creative that it is, I think, the more happiness that you'll end up feeling. And when we're talking about creativity, it doesn't need to be painting a painting. It doesn't need to be drawing something. It could be just going outside and using your imagination for a couple of minutes. But just finding that time and really honoring that time for yourself. When I talked earlier about dinner, I said that like I started at 5 o'clock, and I keep myself to that. At 5 o'clock every day, that's when I start cooking. So pick out that experience, pick out that time, and honor that time because it's time that you should have for yourself.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Freemuth.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm happy to join you.
All right.